Oh. Okay, so there you go. Because then we have to post it to YouTube. And I did put in the chat the agenda that we threw up, but.
Thank you.
And with Jean not here, I'll just say, one of the things, I'm glad that you have a note taker, but one of the things you might want to come back to, if not today, we can talk about frequency of meetings and timing going forward. That's something, just want to confirm if you guys want to meet weekly and set these up on the calendar, or if you want bi-weekly, how you'd like to do this. And then if you want 1 hour meetings or an hour and a half now that we're doing public meetings.
Yes. Do we want to revisit that before we close, just based on the work we need to do, or the work we assume we're going to need to do? Does that make sense?
Yes.
But we should definitely answer that question and clarify what we think works well and best. Thanks for dropping the agenda in the chat, Jean. Do you want me to run this meeting or?
Great. Can I, as we approve the agenda though, since I'm really interested in the 410 agenda item, could we switch the 410 agenda item to now and then move the public engagement conversation after?
Yeah, just like we're gonna switch the sort of confirming the frequency of meetings and the timing going forward. But let's just start, this conversation with glad, and I think we all are glad that we're moving these to public meetings as we move more into substance. So I think that will be important. And Jane, I don't know like how you promote other meetings, but it does seem like we should just make sure that the Climate Council and subcommittee members know that these are public now. Did you send that already to the full Climate Council, or should we do that?
No, but I can do that. And they'll be on but they're always on the climate change website, as well as the Department of Libraries site they get warned on. So, but I should probably do that for both. The biomass group has a set schedule now. And if we have it, once we have a set schedule for transportation, I can flag that for full council participation.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Happy
to. All right, well, let's move into, unless there's anything else people want to say about that, let's move into the RFP or RFI, RFP update.
Hi, Joey. Gina's here.
Oh,
my cell phone.
Hi, Gina.
I don't know. The coverage on Route 7 comes and goes. I'll do my best.
Okay, well, we can hear you fine right now, Gina, and
Good.
We've started recording. We're glad to have you here. We hope your dad's okay.
Yep.
We switched the agenda around a little bit. We're going to start first with the technical analysis RFI, RFP discussion. We're going to front load that, and we're going to revisit the sort of confirmation of the frequency of the meetings and the timing going forward, and then talk and also talk public engagement. But let's talk about the RFI, RFP
Great.
first. So I'm going to hand it over to Megan. If you want to give an update. Thanks.
Yeah, so we finally heard back from the Climate Alliance on late last week. I think I've already updated this group that we did get funding for phase 1 of our ask, which is Advanced Clean Cars 2 analysis. So that is off and running very quickly, and Colin's been working really closely with the folks at NESCOM and their contractor to get them all the data that they need to continue. And there's a large group of states that are also taking advantage of that technical analysis. So we're all working together to be consistent and sing from the same sheet of music. So that's going well. The phase 2, as you know, we are still waiting to hear. And there was so I'm just going to back up a second and highlight something that I just dropped in the chat, which is a very new guidance from the Federal Highway Administration that provides agencies of transportation detailed guidance about how to use a certain portion of the IIJA or the bipartisan infrastructure law funding to develop what's called a carbon reduction strategy and to implement policies and programs based on that strategy with those funds. And so when the Climate Alliance folks reached back out to me last week, it was, the same day that this guidance had come out, and their question to me was, well, this carbon reduction strategy kind of sounds a lot like what you want to do in phase 2. And it looks like you have access to a lot of money to compile this strategy. So can you just use that money to essentially do the work that you were planning to do in phase 2 of your technical analysis application? And I said, well, I'll get back to you on that. So, I know that Andrea and folks at VTrans are still digesting that brand new guidance document and understanding the impacts of that guidance on that particular pot of money that's tied to the carbon reduction strategy. But I think it's, as I said, it's new. We're kind of trying to figure it all out, but, reading the writing on the wall, I feel like Climate Alliance at this point is just like, hey, this is something that you're required to do that's tied to these funds, and there's money available to do this analysis and to make it part of your carbon reduction strategy. So, it sounds like you're all set. So that was pretty much the message that I got. They did have a small amount of money left in their transportation sector related pot of technical assistance money that they could offer us, but it's pretty small. It's $21,000, and clearly we won't be able to do the phase 2 work with that money alone. So that's where we are. I have not responded to the Climate Alliance folks yet, but it seems like we need to just like take a breath and try to digest and understand what this carbon reduction strategy requirement is, and how the technical analysis work that we wanted to do for the transportation sector in Vermont could tie into development of that strategy, and that we could do this kind of investigation and technical analysis as part of that. And the deadline for submitting your carbon reduction strategy to the Federal Highway Administration, I believe, is late 2023, right, Andrea? Or September?
Yeah, in November.
November, yeah. So that is a ways away. And so I think begs the question, like, do we extend our timeline for the work that we had previously contemplated to align with the carbon reduction strategy guidance and timeline? So the guidance is in the chat, feel free to take a look at it. I think we're all still trying to understand what it means. But that's the update. I'm sorry, I don't have anything more conclusive. But I think, I understand Climate Alliance's position. They don't want to spend money on something that we are required to do, and that we have a lot of funding to do through this requirement in the IIJA.
Well, thank you for that update. I feel like it's one part disappointing, one part understandable, and another part challenging just because the timing.
Yeah.
One question I have for you: when are the IIJA dollars flowing down? And would there be any flexibility if, like, AOT, if there were dollars that we could, to do this work more quickly, and then we could backfill with IIJA dollars?
So the money is available now. It's
Okay.
currently available. I forget the total number, even in the carbon reduction program. I'm looking at it right here. It's 32 million over 5 years for the carbon reduction program. So 6 million, over 6 million this year, which is almost half over.
Right. And have you spent any of that 6 million yet?
So I am digging into this today. CASA just put together an analysis for us, a summary of the whole guidance, and we're trying to figure out exactly what it means. And And of course, sort of the bringing it all together is that carbon reduction strategy that's not due for another year and a half. So it's still unclear to me how it's a lot about what types of projects we're implementing and putting money into those projects to get to a strategy. So it's kind of unclear to me if like how we're going to allocate this money through projects and then like get credit in the strategies, or if we're going to not spend any of this money until we have a strategy developed, or how it's going to go, because we have so many different ways that we're receiving funds right now through these different programs. Our agency is still sort of digesting what those potential pathways are. So right now, I just have to dig in more and figure out, how that's going to all play out, really.
Mm-hmm.
So
But-
Andrea, can I ask a question? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
What's it, if I want to put my hand up, star something?
No, it's okay. Just
Anyway,
talk.
Just blurt it out, Gina.
The 6 million you just referred to, is that for the charging stations and all the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, not research that would lead up to the climate strategy, for lack of a better word, that you need
So-
the rules on, you need the guidance on? Not
And
the
like I
rules,
said,
the
I'm just starting to dig into the guidance. So I think it's
Yeah.
all of those things. It can be used for EV, it can be used for projects that address transportation to demand management and VMT and mobility
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
micromobility. And it can be used to develop a strategy.
Okay, because what we need right now is money to do the background research and data analysis. That's what we needed, that funding from the Climate Alliance. So the question is, what flexibility do you have with the 6 million now without having, and I know with these federal programs, the guidance is so critical for what this strategy has or cannot continue, can include. But if the Climate Alliance feels confident that the type of research we're interested in is eligible, then that's a good thing. I'd be very interested in seeing Costa's readout of the program. That's something you could share with us.
Yeah, I'm gonna meet with him before I share it, because I
Yep.
think he had a little bit of differing interpretation just off the, the limited time I've had to dig into it so far. But yeah, once we get settled on that, which I hope is in like by the end of next week, I would say we have a pretty clear path forward on what this means for us and how we think we're going to have to use it. And every time one of these guidance rolls out, there's a bunch of questions that come up with it. Like for our EVSC deployment, we have to have our plan approved before we can allocate any funds. So I haven't dug in enough to understand if we have to have a strategy in place before we can take credit or allocate funds in this program. And then it overlaps with other funding programs that are out already. So it is quite confusing to dissect, but that's my task at hand.
The timing is so confounding.
I know. So that's the biggest part here. We're already behind schedule in getting our RFP out the way we wanted to. So we have to see where we can get and what time frame. So like I said, I'm digging into the guidance to understand how we can roll out that money, or what requirements specifically need to be addressed in the plan, and if that aligns with what we're looking at here with the RFP.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and thank you, and we'll look forward to staying tuned. And if there's anything beyond, what's in the RFP and what's in the sort of memos that we put together and shared, that would be helpful to you, Andrea, to sort of let us know.
Mhm.
Just as a reminder, when the RFI went out there, the responses, there was a difference in sort of the responses about the estimated cost, but wasn't the estimated cost in the order of like $250,000? Can someone remind me what some of the respondents said it would take for them to do this work for us? Do people remember?
I don't recall having that information.
No?
Yeah, I don't think we had that either.
No.
Sorry.
I mean, are you thinking of a different RF?
Yeah,
Maybe, Joey? I
Yeah.
know for the life cycle analysis work, we had,
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of.
yeah.
But I am sort of wondering if we can, if there's an analogy there, like, is it, you know, like, can we get some good analysis for, you know, what's affordable to do the good work that we need to do? Seems like that might be in the realm of reason.
The biggest hindrance now is just going to be timing of funding.
Yeah.
And meeting the guidance. Sorry.
So one other question for you, Megan, you haven't responded to Climate Alliance, and this may be a ridiculous idea, but it seems like the timing is especially challenging for Vermont, because I believe we're the only state with the 2025 pollution reduction deadline as opposed to 2030. So I am wondering if there may be, I'm just wondering if we need to do this work sooner rather than later. Is there someone that that can help support us doing this in a more timely fashion and reimburse down the road? I don't know if that's AOT, if there's flexibility, you know, or anyway. It just seems
Yeah.
like Vermont is in a different position than other states where we have a much earlier timeline and 40% of our emissions. We got work to do there. I'm just trying to think about how do we overcome the hurdle of the crunched timeline. Jared.
Just to go back a second, one of the questions that I have about the IIJA funds is it correct that all of those funds have basically been spoken for in the governor's budget and in what the legislature has been working on? Or so, for instance, if we wanted to be able to include this research and analysis within that, would it need to show up in the budget, or are there broad enough categories within that proposed funding that it could fit within, or are there kind of carve outs of funding that are basically at the discretion of the agency rather than having to go through the budgeting? I'm just wondering how much of that, it just seems like we could be in this awkward situation where Climate Alliance is saying, well, you've got money and you're required to do this, you have money that's eligible to do it, but if what the governor's budget and what the legislature decides to spend that money on, right now, I don't recall, Joey would know better than I do, and you would probably know better than I do, Andrea, like I haven't heard any discussions about using federal funds to do this research and analysis being approved in the budgeting process. And I just wouldn't want to be stuck in a position where all of that money is going to projects and we don't have the ability to move forward the research and analysis on the overarching kind of policy frameworks that are needed to have everything, you know, be complementary and add up.
yeah. I wish I knew more about that. And I will in like the next year as I go through this position a little bit and get some experience. But I don't know exactly how the money has to be, how it comes in. I mean, we have coffers of money coming in from all over the place. Chris, you might even have a better idea of how all of this works, or Gina, even having been here in this position longer than I have been. But it does make,
There are better. Go on.
no, but I just was going to say projects must be identified in the STIP to allocate funds from this program. So I'm just not sure how those things all line up, or, you know, because like you said, the money, they say the money is available, but what has to happen to have them specifically allocated to meet the eligibility requirements of this program, it's a little unknown to me right now, but Gina, if you can help.
Well, Michelle's not on the phone because I know she could answer this in a second. I mean, there are buckets of federal programs that are
Yeah.
in a V-Trans's budget that gets passed
Right.
by the legislature. Those buckets don't necessarily include, like the research program has many, many topics in it, you know, to the tune of millions of dollars. And each one of those research projects is not identified in the budget. The legislature is approving the program.
Yeah.
So, you know, it depends on which of those federal buckets this falls into. It's not clear to me right now. I mean, the STIP is the State Transportation Improvement Program, which is all the work that's federally funded, and it's mostly physical stuff, not I don't know where research falls vis-a-vis the STIP. Anyway, to get back to your question, Jared, there are big buckets.
There are big buckets that aren't specifically spelled out
projects.
necessarily.
Michelle can explain this beautifully.
I'll have to have her teach me how to explain it beautifully then.
But I mean, I think it's a good question, but does it also mean it feels like there may be some potential flexibility, I guess is what and it sounds like that's what you're going to be looking into, Andrea, over the next week or two.
Yeah.
To understand what are the parameters of the dollars, what might be possible to inform this conversation, which I think will be very helpful.
Yeah.
Can I sorry.
Go ahead,
I feel like the other person on the phone now who doesn't know how to raise their hand and drive safely.
Yeah, don't do
Yeah. So one of the other things I just want to highlight and just put a finer point on it is this requirement that AOT and therefore likely where the administration will fall on the timing of a strategy, a broad strategy being a year out from what the Climate Council has identified as a timeline. And so I'm not saying it's bad or good, but I do just want to put a point on that because I think that is important. And I do appreciate that we have the short-term emissions goal of 2025, and we have no way to know what's going to happen over the next 4 years or 3 years, I should say. But, you know, based on our transportation sector for 2021, if there's any lasting power as we come out of COVID, we were already at our 2025 emissions reductions for the transportation sector. So we are somewhat in a mindset of maintaining those reductions and really looking forward to 2030 now and how to meet that requirement. So just wanted to highlight those two things. And there's real challenges with the timing now of not having funding and not having an RFP out there to stand up a policy recommendation for the council this fall. Like every day is now pushing us and making it harder.
Sorry, I'm meaning to clear my throat. Just two quick reflections. One is on the development of the carbon reduction strategy. It looks like I think I heard it's a deadline of November 2023, but presumably that wouldn't mean it couldn't happen sooner. And my question would be, is AOT planning to do something different or new, or why wouldn't the starting point just be the transportation section of the CAP? I mean, it seems like an area that we've already done a ton of research and made consensus recommendations on for both the transportation sector as a whole and pathways around reductions. And we have LEAP modeling, pathways reduction, and it would seem problematic to me if there was a state carbon reduction strategy that wasn't basically either what already exists in the CAP for transportation or kind of the next stage of that with added detail. So that would be one question. And if we finish that early, does that open up funds that otherwise wouldn't be available until after that deadline in 2020? If we basically, this is a vast oversimplification, but if we can take what we've already developed for the transportation section of the CAP and the transportation pathways modeling and fit it into whatever is needed for the carbon reduction strategy, submit that sooner, does that then open up funds that otherwise wouldn't be available until after November 2023? That would just be a question that I think might be worth asking. But regardless, it feels to me like we know what we want with this RFP, and that we want and need this policy analysis to inform the council's decision and the recommendation to fill the transportation gap in the cap. And so the question is just, how do we, it feels to me it's not a question of do we do it, it's a question of how do we piece together and be kind of flexible and adaptive enough to make sure that it gets funded on the timeline that we need, you know, with one or more sources. And it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like we all have that commitment, and the question is just, we're trying to figure out more information so we can do the math to add up kind of what can be called upon when, and how would that fit together? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. And to understand all the different requirements. There's always, like I said, there's always questions every time these guidance come out. So it says not later than 2 years after enactment, which is the 2 years would be that, well, 2 years after enactment, November 15th, 2023. So I guess, yeah, because of when this all rolled out. So, and I would anticipate that our strategy would align with a lot of the pathways, a lot of the recommendations of the CAP, not necessarily every single one of them. And we have other studies already in action that will certainly play into and be probably incorporated into this carbon reduction strategy. So it's just a matter of, like you said, putting all those pieces together and figuring out what funds are available when for the timing. Obviously, we're already behind in our timing for what we had proposed as developing a recommendation for whatever it was, October, November timeframe for the council's consideration. So I think until I can dig into this, I think we might have to be prepared based on this to not meet that schedule that we have set up specifically right now. I think that's something we all have to get our heads around, because it was a really aggressive schedule already.
Or to make a recommendation with the best information at hand.
That's exact, yep. Yep.
It stays on that schedule. Because a lot of these policy issues have been studied very deeply ad nauseum. And I think it's,
can I say something? I think the strategy, though, will guide V-Trans on the federal program in Vermont, which our climate action plan does not do. It does not say how many dollars should be spent on transit, let's say, or how many dollars need to be spent on bike ped programs. So the federal strategy is to guide the federal program in Vermont, which is really programmatic. It's the things that transportation agencies do and how they should do them better to address climate, as opposed to transportation writ large, which is what the current CAB talks about. That's my, not having seen the rules or the guidance on the climate strategy that's coming from US DOT, that's my guess, though, is what they're talking about, which is a little different than what you're talking about, Jared, and what the council needs right now. They need both. We need both.
Yeah, I think you're right, Gina. It's more like a lot of what I'm reading so far. Yeah, what our federal programs, what our projects are going to get us, rather than a policy.
Exactly. It's so important. Different.
Maybe that's enough to push back then on the Climate Alliance and at least take what we have. The other piece of information which we could talk about and how it influences the timing of this work and the recommendation from the council is, the somewhat of the life being breathed back into TCIP. And the fact that if that became a viable strategy again, we won't know that till, you know, a year from now. And so, like, preempting that knowledge might be, you know, trying to not know, put out another policy recommendation without knowing if TCIP is a viable option again, might be drawing a blank on the word I want, but short-sighted.
Yeah, although I would just offer that I think we don't want to end up in the same situation that we were before, where even if it seems promising and then if it goes away, so there may be a contingent recommendation that could say, you know, which is basically what we already have. I mean, we already have, when regional viability exists, join TCI as a recommendation in the cap. That could continue, but having to identify the kind of backup primary lead policy overarching framework to give us a high degree of confidence we're going to meet the reductions. I think we could still come up with that recommendation, or say that we think that recommendation would be better even if TCI did move forward. Like, we should be open to that conversation. But I just wouldn't want to like wait for TCI and then not be back in the same situation where we were, where all our eggs were in that basket. And then we don't have a
definitely not suggesting waiting, but definitely think it's also very important to align. There's just so much limited bandwidth and timing of work and policy. Like, I feel very strongly that like you have to have clear priorities around like what's the top priority. And if TCIP is coming back online, anyway, I won't say what I think of it.
Chris,
I will say that, one thing I just wanted to say to Jared's point quickly is just, I think technical analysis that's specific to Vermont is so key to success. I don't see how you put forward a recommendation this fall. And so I think aligning this conversation to figure out if that's the movement is to still do that, then how we fund the technical analysis in a way that allows us to have that information for this fall. Because while I understand there's been analyses of these policies outside of Vermont, like, it's just so important, I think, on a Vermont scale.
I want to get to Chris. Thanks, Jane. But can I just ask a clarifying question? Jane, you said in a year related to TCIP. Can you speak to the timing that you sort of highlighted?
It was a likely transition of the governor in Massachusetts, and then the conversations being restarted by Georgetown to prep for that. A year was just a total shot in the dark, but after January.
All right. I just was looking at just clarifying the timeline. Thanks. Chris, go ahead.
Related, I don't know how Central Virginia was, but I don't imagine they're coming back in anytime soon. So I guess I'm just wondering, as far as IJA, I think it'd be a quick conversation with Costa, but to what extent, have I just missed it? Has there been like a higher level kind of strategic funding? I mean, I know Michelle's been a part of the conversation, but have we kind of packaged things up with VTrans as far as what they can obligate?
To my understanding at this point, no, because the guidance on these various programs is still rolling out.
Okay.
One at a time. And so we're trying to get that comprehensive view of all of it. And we expect those to be, I think most of them are out. Costa would answer this directly, of course, but most of the larger programs are out. The grant programs, that there's like 26 of them, only a few of those have rolled out. But some of those are quite large for rail and different, in the billions of dollars, but other ones are really pretty small, but we don't have guidance on a lot of those yet. So to answer your question, I think we're waiting for more of those to roll out, for the bigger buckets of money to figure out how, to learn about the match requirements, to learn about all the specific eligibility requirements, and then put a strategic IIJA funding plan together that will answer all of these different questions.
I guess everybody knows that part of the challenge that Vermont's going to have is making that match for a lot of the IIJA funds, period. Just because we're such a small state, how to provide that match. and I agree with Jane that we really do need a characterization for Vermont, and frankly, I mean, include in that a characterization of Vermonters and how, the high percentage of household income that we spend on gas to get around. And then the other piece of that too, right, has been in the news more recently about the sustainability, viability of our transit systems, our rural transit systems too. Factoring that in, because it seems like there's ultimately what we need is just a larger mobility blueprint that ties into the greenhouse gas reductions is probably, beyond this group. I mean, it's going to have to be a whole targeted effort looking at how we deal with public transit, how we deal with getting all the stations where they need, the charging stations where they need to be, all of that stuff, just kind of a comprehensive blueprint. But that's I guess I kind of knew in the back of my mind that we're still waiting on some of the guidance. I'm sure that what usually happens with that guidance, right, is once we get it, you have to hurry up and spend it within 2 weeks, because otherwise, it's going to run out based on some schedule that Congress set that didn't take into account the administrivia that's got to be done to actually use the money.
Yep. Okay. It is 4:11. I think that's all true. Well, Jane, we reoriented the agenda, 40 minutes on this conversation. It's been a really good one. To me, this also informs the timing because it feels like, Andrea, you said like a week or two, like it seems like giving you the time you need to do a little digging to better understand this seems like it would be very helpful to regroup, as shortly on the heels of that as possible. So let's pivot away from this conversation, unless, is there anything like that we want to capture in terms of to-dos? Megan, you're going to follow up with Climate Alliance, to the degree we can case make or beseech them to invest. Otherwise I think obviously that's probably a long shot, but I agree
I think
that we need specific Vermont information. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate the timing issue that you brought up, Joey, and can communicate that back to Mark. And this round of funding for them was really competitive. So I think that was a bit of a surprise to them. And so I think when this guidance was issued on Thursday, it was a good opportunity for them to try to be helpful. So.
By helping us help our.
I think the distinction Gina drew out around what a carbon reduction strategy looked like that tied to federal funding and the impact on like how they prioritize application of federal funds to federal programs to cut emissions versus the statewide policy is a good argument to the Climate Alliance about why their funding actually brings added value to Vermont and the analysis we need to do.
Sure. Yeah.
Megan, I think that's a very good point. I agree. And have you had conversations with anyone in Maine? Because it feels like, I don't know if again, we're not the only state that is doing this, but Vermont is a rural state, rural New England state. I'm just wondering what kind of research that we need to be done that would be helpful to others. And is there a pitch that we can make to help us do an analysis that is at the policy level and not at the programmatic / implementation level? Anyway, it's just another.
Yeah, I haven't had any discussions with anyone in Maine specifically on that. So I don't know if you have more ideas about that, Joey, and you want to talk offline.
Let me think about that a little bit more and know some of the folks who've been working on their climate plan and their work there. It just feels like, again, what we're doing here, Vermont is unique and yet similar to some other places.
Yeah.
So, okay, it's almost, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Megan, I can put you in touch with you. There's an equivalent in their climate office around the role that you play here around mitigation strategy and policy. And I can put you in touch with that person too.
Okay, thank you.
Because if they also made a pitch, or if they might be interested in being supportive of a pitch like this, I don't know.
Yeah, it's my understanding that we were the only state to ask for this type of analysis outside of advanced clean cars too.
But they might find it helpful that they didn't think to ask.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So if we only have like 15 minutes, let's pivot to the public engagement conversation. So talking webinars, I don't know if we want to spend any time sort of reflecting on the webinar, but maybe we can use the webinar that we did just fairly recently host to inform the next webinar. And I don't know if anyone has done any further outreach or can provide an update on that, having just been away. I know several of us were. Has anyone made any progress on a webinar? Okay, Megan, if you don't mind giving us an update on the progress that you have made, gratefully, that'd be great.
Sure. So I think I sent an email with this update. I'm sorry if I didn't. I was away last week, so I was trying to kind of coordinate and have some vacation time. But I heard back from James Bradbury at Georgetown Climate Center, and he spoke with Kate Zyla, and they decided that James would be available to speak about TCIP at the webinar that we have planned. And he's free on the I can't remember the date, but it was the day that everyone was available, including sorry, I'm just going to try to find the email. Peggy said that she had limited availability, and so I tried to be mindful of that. And I think the day that he's available is aligns with her availability as well. So, so I left it with James that the task group would reach out to him to have a kind of brief coordination call in advance of the webinar, just to talk about like run of show and details and logistics and what we were kind of looking for substantively in terms of his contribution. So I told him to, said, thank you so much. And that we would be in touch with details about, scheduling that kind of preliminary call with him. And that is all I have.
That's great. Thank you. But you asked him to sort of pencil in that time, and we'll look back. Okay, awesome.
I did.
That is great.
I think it's May 13th. Is that right? I'm still looking for the email, but that's what I have in my brain.
Yeah, it's May 13th at lunchtime.
Great.
Okay. Yes.
Jared, do you have an update? Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I apologize for missing the last call when that date was settled on. But if that is the date and we've got James lined up, I can go ahead, assuming nobody else already has, I can go ahead in this evening or first thing tomorrow morning, reach out to Marie-Claude from Quebec about that date. Hopefully she'll be available, given that it seems to work for everybody else.
Yeah, I'm Jared. Sorry if I kind of preliminarily or what's the word I'm looking for? Narrowed that window without consideration of other folks. It just seemed like it was the only date that everyone on this call was available. So and Peggy too.
And it may be a similar situation where we start with Marie-Claude and she would be wonderful, but depending on the date or the kind of flow, there may be somebody else from her team that, may make sense, but hopefully she'd be available. And but I'll do that outreach and then just let folks know if and when I hear, or as soon as I hear what that is, and we can go from there.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. It's definitely not a problem that you're on vacation, Chris. I'm fully supportive of vacations. But I mean, let's ideally move forward with that date and time, and then if we have to regroup, we'll regroup, but, oh, lucky you. It's amazing. Okay, okay, so that seems like, if, I feel like my gut would say, let's lock in the stars of the show, and ideally it's the TCIP leadership team and the WCI team, and then we can figure out who among us is gonna sort of frame it out, and then what kind of format. But we had talked before, and I think when we get to that level of detail, my instinct would be go back and sort of reflect on what worked well on the webinar that we held around the clean transportation standard, and what we could improve upon to get more public participation and like public input vis-a-vis breakouts or whatever. So does that sound like an okay process if we can like clarify date, time, and then sort of go back and reflect on like exact format? Okay, so but if people can just sort of generally tentatively, Chris, you'll be in a lovely far off location, but can just pencil that in, and then we can go back and revisit like and assign folks on this call or others to ideally join us in that, or ask others. Go ahead.
That's a great proposal, Joey. I would just say one thing to keep in mind, the kind of feedback that I heard after the kind of webinar on performance standards, clean transportation standards, low carbon fuel standards, was that I heard this from both council members and kind of members of the public who attended that. And it was really helpful to have the context of the starting point of what does the Global Warming Solutions Act require? You know, what does the cap include? What is the gap? What do we need to do here? And then it was helpful to hear the details of some of the other programs, but I think multiple people provided feedback that there was a missing step between of like a basic introduction to like, what is a performance standard? How would a clean transportation standard work, rather than immediately going into the details of how it has worked in that case, Oregon, California. So I think if we do this, it would be good to do a 3-step flow where it's the introduction is, you know, similar to what we've done in the past, including the GWSA and the climate action plan, and the, you know, our goal to identify one or more leading transportation policies that can get us to our requirements, and do so while advancing all of our commitments in line with all the criteria we've identified, especially from an equity and perspective. But then kind of have like a high level 101 on like what is meant by an emissions cap or emissions cap and invest program, and then go to the more of the details and specifics about both how WCI works and where it stands now, and how TCI is proposed to work and where it stands now, and some of the key considerations for Vermont. That would be kind of the rough flow that at least would be a starting point that I'd, you know, offer, but others may have thought about it more.
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm grateful to have Greta on the line taking notes so that we can sort of flesh out a format like that makes sense based on, yeah, what we could improve on based on what we hosted last time. So that makes sense to me. Others? All right, with limited time left, so let's, Megan and Jared, you have your to-dos. If you can just sort of follow up via email. Seems most important to clarify a WCI rep, ideally Marie-Claude, or someone else capable on her team. Then maybe over email, we could figure out, again, who among this team, and then how do we promote it more broadly to climate council members and subcommittee members and the public. But maybe we can pivot now to advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks for an update there on public engagement.
Just before we leave that last part, I will also ask in that email if Marie-Claude or someone else from her team can, about possible times for like a planning call. I think we need to do that next week or early the week of the 9th. I'm just wondering, Megan, did James give you any info on his availability, or we should just figure that out offline. But I guess I'm just, does that sound right? We're probably gonna have to do a planning call next week or early the week after.
Yeah, I think that would be probably helpful for the presenter, so that, because you know, we can provide them with some guidance on the goals for the webinar, and they might want some time to shape their materials around that. So I think that's fair.
That's great.
So yeah, Jared, so what do you want to confirm Marie Claude first, and then we can find times to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll probably CC you, Megan, on it, just so it, because given the short time frame, so we're on the same page.
Okay, sounds great.
We can figure out times together.
All right, Megan, advanced clean cars, advanced clean trucks.
Yeah, so we are cranking right along, trying to get as much information together for the May 15th deadline, which is when we need to provide an update to the Climate Council on the rulemaking process. So we're really close to having a draft of the rule ready to share by the May 15th deadline. Our new attorney, Rachel Stevens, has been doing a great job making those edits and working with CARB. They just released their Advanced Clean Cars rule, Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule on April 12th. So it's very fresh, and we're digesting all of that information and trying to understand how we can incorporate it by reference in Vermont. So we're working on that. We are developing a really robust technical support document to accompany the rule itself. And that I'll let everyone know right now is not going to be done by May 15th, largely because NESCOM and their contractor were just recently, as of last week, engaged to perform the technical analysis, and they are not able to complete that by May 15th, which I think is reasonable. So we're going to have some placeholders in the technical support document with information that will be forthcoming and that we will provide to the council potentially on a rolling basis as we're able to update the document. But we will have a much more robust discussion of advanced clean trucks, because that analysis has already been done and has been kind of out in the world for a while. And so that will be more complete in the technical support document. And then we're including in that, you know, just kind of a discussion of climate change and how it's impacting Vermont, which is something that Brian is working on, who's on the call. And we are going to be either putting in a placeholder or providing information on the health benefits of both rules using the COBRA model. So that's all kind of churning right now. And Deirdre and I are going to be working on a cover memo for the council to explain, you know, exactly what it is that they're going to be getting on May 15th, so they understand the pieces that are forthcoming. But I mean, I think we're totally on track. It's just that pieces are going to be kind of coming in right up against the deadline, but I don't see any reason why we won't be able to file with ICAR on July 1st as planned. So that's that. Any questions?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Mm-hmm.
A question, well, two questions. One, more of a comment about the climate change section you just referenced. I guess I'm curious what that is and why it wouldn't reference the section in the climate action plan, because I'll just say that having a close relationship, I'm actually meeting her right now, the state, with Leslie Ann, that will, if there is anything that is out of, like, not reflective of the work that was done for the climate plan, that I think that will be problematic for the council.
I
AKA
welcome.
Leslie Ann, maybe.
Yeah, and I welcome Brian to chime in if he's able, but I think that is information that should be consistent with what's in the CAP and reflects the content from the most recent climate assessment. But Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not. I pulled it from the climate, the latest climate assessment. But you're right, Jane. I didn't cross-reference it with the information in the cap, but that's not really a big lift.
Thank you. So the climate assessment, the Vermont climate assessment it's slightly problematic. So I would draw more heavily on what we have in the climate action plan, and it's not going to cross-reference with the climate assessment you're going to find. So we could talk about this offline.
Okay.
But, I would encourage you to use the stuff in the plan as much as possible.
Okay, thank you for that guidance. That's helpful. I mean, it's in the technical support document, really just to provide more context for the necessity of the rulemaking and kind of striking a balance in terms of the impacts versus the benefits that we're discussing in that document.
Awesome. And then the other thing, just since we're at the public engagement part, I'll just say, the conversation with the council on the 16th, Megan and I started to talk about this morning, but, this is a unique rule in that the council can't really influence what the rule it looks like. We have to do what California is doing or not do it at all. And the component where there is an ability to influence what it looks like on the ground is the public engagement component, and that we haven't really started. We need to flesh out what we bring to the council as a recommendation for the public engagement strategy around the rulemaking.
That's super helpful. I think that's absolutely true. And my question is around a similar thing is, do we have a sense of timing for public engagement? Because it feels like, because I think, I'm going to pivot us to wrapping this meeting and going to next meetings and consistent schedule and stuff like that. But it would be helpful to inform that, to know, again, remind us the windows of if May 13th is our next webinar, what are the windows for public engagement or the arenas of time we're working in that we should be making sure that we're focused on the public engagement piece of that around then.
So legally, we can't start doing the public engagement on the rulemaking itself until late August because of the way that our Administrative Procedure Act dictates the timing of the public engagement window. So if we're doing meetings specific to the GWSA rulemaking requirements and we're advertising them as being held in compliance with those requirements, that's when we can start doing that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then before I turn it over to Jared, if you do reach out to someone in Maine, I'd be curious to learn about their public engagement around advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks, because it sounds like they did quite a bit. And if there were lessons learned or tips and strategies that might be helpful to know about.
Well,
yeah, I know.
I feel like that's debatable, Joey.
But things not to step in, things to avoid.
Yeah. Deirdre has a really good relationship with Lynn Kading in Maine. And so we can have an informal conversation with her about lessons learned. I feel like, yeah.
Okay. We can leave it at that, but
yeah.
Okay. Jared, go ahead.
I was just going to ask quickly, and if this is anything other than just short response, we can connect offline, Megan. But I'm wondering if the challenge with the kind of timeline with NESCOM and the kind of getting that contract going and having initial analysis ready, is it helpful? And even though my understanding is California has updated some of the details that make some of the initial EAN analysis a little bit dated, is that at least helpful as a stand-in or a kind of placeholder that can provide some initial analysis that can be ready sooner, even if they're doing a more robust analysis that has that up-to-date data on a longer timeline?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jared. We can connect more offline. I think if we can provide some preliminary picture of the emissions benefits, then we should do that. I am wondering if we'll have the resources to kind of compile that prior to the May 15th deadline. But maybe we could talk offline a little bit more about that, because I think,
Okay.
I mean, we certainly presented some of that, you know, as you know, in the April 1st webinar. So, yeah.
I'll just note that in case there are any kind of requests or clarifications of May, those of you who are on the EAN newsletter will have seen she's leaving for a new position, and her last day is going to be on May 6th. So if there are any clarifications, it would be good to get them to her in the next week and a half.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that. I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you for letting us know.
The thing is, there's a lot of transparency behind all of her work. It's, you know, our approach is always kind of very open source, transparent spreadsheet models where you can see all the assumptions, and those, if the inputs change, we can just update the approach. So
Yeah. Are you going to try to find another data manager, Jared, or?
We're hiring for an operations and events manager. And we're going to work to, we probably will eventually hire a new data and analysis position, but it'll probably be longer term, not right away, maybe more late summer, early fall.
Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you for that update, Megan. Okay. Timing of these meetings. Weekly, bi-weekly? What do people, I mean, we can always flex, we can, you know, but it seems like
I would propose that we continue to meet weekly until we have some finality surrounding our plan for the year. I feel like every time we meet, there's like a new piece of information that we need to digest, and I don't know if that will just keep happening, but like, I think it would be good to have more frequent meetings until we do have a better picture of what this year is gonna look like. And we also have just like a really robust public engagement schedule that I think takes a lot of time to plan. And so having these meetings more frequently allows for that space to happen. So that's my opinion.
Chris?
Who was on this group from VTrans?
Andrea.
She had to go.
And Karen is on.
Oh yeah. Hi, Karen.
That's right. Okay.
But Andrea is VTrans and Karen too, but Andrea's their council rep.
Of course. Yeah, what I was trying to figure out was, there've been a few times when we probably should have, well, never mind. What I was trying to think was somebody who could speak to something about the money decisions, who could like offer insight in the moment to kind of help move us along. But their budget is huge and complex, and that's probably going to be even more than Costa or Joe or somebody. So anyway, never mind.
No, I think it's a very good point, and I think, you know, Andrea is still fairly new. I think this is Michelle, you know, but her ability to participate is very limited. So
Especially during the legislative session, and Karen and I hope Karen and Andrea, I'm not taking anything away from them. It's just a biggest, probably one of the biggest agencies we've got with a very complex budget. I just try to figure out how to move that.
It's Jean again. I've been in and out. I agree with Megan. We need to meet every week, and we look to Andrea to bring in Costa and bring in Michelle and really have some targeted discussions around, once we get more, Andrea can shed more light on the program, and she becomes the person who will bring in these other people that I think Chris is talking about from VTrans. And it's going to require us meeting every week. There's just too much on the table right now.
Yep.
And especially from summer, people are gonna go drifting off to some nice, you know, it's gonna be inconsistent. So now, I think now's the time to dig in. That's my sense.
All right, I agree. So maybe we can follow up and let Jane know weekly at 3:30. And we can say to 5, but we can always work to cut them early, and we would invite public input if members of the public do want to and can attend and have, input to share. Does that make sense? 3:30 to 5, and then if we don't need a full hour and a half, we can trim.
That's perfect for me. I love that timing.
Okay. My other question is, do we want, and what would be the best timing? It feels like, to the money question, that it would be helpful to get Michelle attending one of the next upcoming meetings, to have her provide, maybe it's not next week because the legislative session won't have wrapped yet, and Andrea will not have, with a broader team at AOT, to go through and analyze the guidance documents, but to have them give like an overview to try to bust through some of the opaqueness of the budget and the money questions. Should we invite her to attend in a week or two?
I think that's a great idea.
And what does the timing look like? It feels like next week, again, the ink won't be dry on the state budget yet. So like a little bit of time on the May 9th agenda, if that timing works for Michelle.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. And Greta, bless you for taking notes. If you don't mind highlighting when you share them with me, and I can forward them to others, Greta, the places where we need, they're like to-dos, and we can figure out who's going to do. You're the best. Thank you. Okay. Anything else, team? Weekly meetings, 3:30 to 5. We'll cut early. Do Mondays not work for you, Chris? Yeah. Okay.
It just, as a director of a organization, sometimes things don't fit a separate schedule, so.
We get that, and I very much appreciate the time you are able to give. So, and if we need to reflect and realign post-legislative session, like we can, but let's lock this in for now, and hopefully this works for as many people as possible. Okay. Any members of the public or anyone, any last words in this public comment portion of our meeting? Okay. Well, thanks for a productive meeting today, everyone. We'll follow up. Lots to do.
Thanks,
Sounds
everybody.
good. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.